Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I want to talk about common debate on regarding looks and whether it matters to women. I developed a conjecture regarding this, my assessment of this, and it's not good to generalize for all cases, but in order to do so, it's best to globalize everything as much as possible. So we know it makes logical sense that it's a game of probability. It's a parabolic relationship depending on where you reside. Meaning, women are attracted to different types of guys depending on the environment. Most males are near the neutral axis or the average. There's going to be outliers like actors and so forth. Some may be denoted as universally attractive or whatnot. It won't hold true for all cases, very likely, but because there's a range of attraction. But generally, on the probability scale, you're going to find that less and less males are extremely attractive. So there's two poles, but the poles change and deviate depending on where you reside. So therefore, you can always find, someone. That's why our genetics actually got to this point. It means you exist because throughout your lineage, your parents were, attractive enough. So it's, at least unless there's severe defects, so forth, those are definite outliers. But regarding the whether it matters, we're going to start with I'm going to define why looks are the precondition or catalyst that spur attraction. And women, in general, they like to feel feminine. Therefore, it would make sense that if a male is masculine looking, his personality should match and be relatively masculine. Therefore, she would feel more feminine. And the same is applied for males. Males want to feel masculine, so they want a woman who acts feminine generally. We're talking about heterosexual women and heterosexual men. Now, for these cases, suppose a heterosexual woman is dating an optimal, her idealized male, very masculine looking and very masculine persona. Now, let's suppose now we substitute the male, the face with a very feminine looking woman. Well, what's going to happen is chemistry is going to go out the window. It's going to completely eliminate. There's going to be no receptivity or sexual receptivity or any chemistry in this case. It's going to just floor to zero, predominantly to zero. But anyways, so what we can do in this case is if they just met at first sight, we're going to take this case, we're going to revert back, and now we're going to depreciate the looks. We're going to minimize the masculine features. We're going to go from the the initial position all the way to the very feminine, scale, the opposite end. So as we translate, let's say every day, this male wakes up more and more feminine looking. Well, eventually there's going to exist some limit where chemistry is eradicated. So basically, this is defined as a minimum threshold. The minimum threshold is defined on the basis of a minimum standard for looks, and provided that the personality is optimized. Now, therefore, what this means is that, if the position, let's say the looks its position is fixed, and now we're going to use my personality in this case. Of course, the probability or likelihood of my personality being optimal is very slim. I definitely, because that's an idealized version. So therefore, I'm going to be below the minimum threshold, and I'm not going to get a chance. So what could happen is the looks could be, I could add masculinity. If you add masculinity now to the case, what ends up happening is you're above the minimum threshold, but now let's depreciate the personality. Let's make it less valuable in the subjective viewpoint. What's going to happen is that now you're going to depreciate the overall traction, and you may get kicked out of the door depending on how far it projects you into how far it projects the overall traction due to looks. So it's funny how we tend to view one or the other. We tend to say, oh, looks are more important, or look, personality. What's interesting is we always have this yin yang. We always in society want to create some dipole. You have liberal, you have conservative, you have positive, you have negative, you have manic depressive, you have or mania, you have depression. You have fat, you have skinny. We have a dipole in every region, so we tend to have now those who say looks matter, those who say personality matters. Looks, personality, looks. And you create a dipole. Well, therefore, because there's a dipole, there must exist a spectrum of emphasis placed on looks. So what that means is some people put more emphasis, others put less emphasis. It depends on age, it depends on situation or bias. There could be bias. Some women don't want to date very attractive men because they may be cheaters. It's an emotional bias. It's not holding true, but it's just due to their life circumstances. They tend to lower the bar. But it has to be within the range of attraction, that limit. There has to be that minimum spark that ignites the fire. And then the personality is what carries the fire, keeps it burning throughout the whole, time span. Otherwise, if you get rid of oxygen and so forth, you're not going to have a fire and so forth. Or you can just, add wind and volatility and instability, and you get rid of the fire. And that's the same as equivalent as your personality depreciates. Or you can go in the other direction. But what the thing is what we need to realize is they work together in tandem. Personality and looks work together. They're inseparable. What this means is that looks reinforces a perception of personality, and personality reinforces a perception of looks. To me, personality is essentially an illusion from the observer. You're never going to know the exact personality. It takes a lot of time, but in initial impression, we do is we judge on the basis of the expression. We'll judge personality. Oh, he may be like this. He may be like this because of this look, because of that look, and so forth. We naturally do this. We're naturally inclined to do so. And basically, a very attractive male is going to be deemed generally more confident than a very unattractive male. Even you reverse the process with a woman, it's just so therefore you get value, you get appreciation in your traits, or the receptivity to your traits as a function of looks. Meaning, if the attraction increases, you're going to be more receptive. It's because that chemistry or that connection, that dopamine surcharge that you're getting, it makes you feel good. It validates the inside, and so forth. And a woman wants to feel feminine, so therefore, if a man gets more masculine looking, she's going to feel more feminine, even if everything stays fixed. It's those traits become appreciated and valued. Vice versa, if your personality gets worse, and like in their viewpoint, your perception of your looks is going to fade. You're not going to become more you're not going to look as appealing. So they both kind of deviate, and therefore also the minimum threshold is not static. It's cyclic. It's always changing. It depends on the situation. It depends, on the scenario. It could broaden over time. It could narrow over time. Usually with age it broadens because we tend to go away from focusing on looks as we age. Why? Because our instinctual drives dissipate. Because this makes logical sense to me. Provided there's no bias, there's no emotional bias. If a woman has a pool of options to select from, and let's just suppose that within this pool everything's the same: personality, looks, not looks, personality, status, monetary value, security, same job, everything's the same. Of course, she's going to choose the most attractive male, provided there's no bias. It's this. Even the males will select the most attractive woman. This is a natural process. Why would you select anything less? Now, this is not, of course, reality. They don't just have a pool. Dating apps has kind of changed this. So with dating apps, women can choose a higher quality mate. This is inevitable. They're going to naturally, from a pool of men, select the most attractive, like I said before. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles. That's the way, nature intends. It wouldn't make sense to go for the least attractive option. So of course, society changes. It's changing our standards to a degree. But there, like I said, if that minimum condition is satisfied, which most men are average, that's why they can exude confidence and work on their charisma and so forth, and play the game and win a woman. Because in reality, in actuality, you're not interacting with many people on a given basis. But of course, dating apps has changed that. Without if we didn't have that, you wouldn't be selecting. You have to kind of go within that region, within your social circle, and so forth. Like if you're an introvert, you tend to have less options and so forth. So it is a function on the options, but it also is like on an age and so forth, and basically emphasis is deviated over time. And also, like, it would make sense to me, asexuals probably have the least emphasis on looks because they're not focused on that. They don't have the drive. When you have that drive, the sex drive, so forth, looks has to become part of the equation because you have a sexual relationship. There has to be at least some minimum spark. So, but looks are subjective. Therefore, the range is very wide. It's like if it's funny that like men will be like, "Whoa, this woman was with this ugly male." Well, they're ugly to you, but are they really ugly to that woman? Or they could be rated higher or lower, so forth, depending on the emphasis, depending on so forth. But generally, it's not. It doesn't translate to all cases. So that's another thing. It's subjective. It's very subjective. So, and it's environmental. If you go to, like, I've noticed women at bars, like bartenders or so forth, or they tend to like, at least in my region, they tend to like guys with beards. If you go to California, they tend to like taller guys. If you go to Manhattan, they tend to like fit and muscular men. If you go to different areas like Africa or so forth, they're gonna like different. They usually like white guys with, you know, uh, with green or colored eyes because it's so deviant from what they're used to, and it gives them more of a novelty. And we naturally are inclined to like novelty and differentiation. It would be incest to date someone who is close to your genetic lineage. Naturally, you want to be somewhat divergent to make sense that way. Um, so, naturally, you got to find, a woman who uh, is is naturally least you meet the minimum standard. And if you actually go out and you put forth work in different regions, your probability is much higher. If you confine yourself at a localized region, there's always a pattern and this is social conditioning, that we tend to follow the majority. This is like social media. Majority of people engage in social media. The majority of people, engage in certain activities within a region. We tend to go with the flow in certain cases. We naturally inclined to want to fit in. Women, they talk about to their friends, they want to associate with a male that at least their friends agree on the terms, personality and looks, and so forth. So, like, if you go to a bar and this woman, her probability is much higher. They like a certain type of guy, and you're deviant from that, then your probability is lower. And you can't complain that you're not having success if you don't diverge from that region and then go to another region. If you're a nerd, you'd probably have more success at the PhD level in academic world, so forth. Naturally, if you're at a bar, you have to play the game. You have to have charisma. If you can't flirt, good luck playing the game. Because there's an expectation, and if you don't meet that, you don't satisfy it. Because think about it. We naturally, it's flirting and so forth and dating. It's a game of validation. Today, we seek validation at a higher rate than ever before. We are obtaining validation at a much higher rate. Think of social media, memes, all these rewards that we're getting fed at much faster, higher frequency. Everything is cyclic. Basically, this reward it reaches a peak and then it diminishes once the novelty depreciates. So, therefore, every time we seek a new reward and it reaches a peak along a timeline, the points are becoming closer and closer together. So what does this mean? We adapt to this. So if we were put in vacuum, we would basically feel the negative effects in proportion to the frequency. So if the frequency is large, a negative effect, cumulative negative effect is larger. But then that cycle starts depreciating over time, and then you reach a new equilibrium. So what ends up happening is that we have a higher expectation. So expectations are on the rise because why? Think about playing a video game, for instance. Why would you play the same video game if you revert back to the past and the resolution is much lower and the graphics are much lower? You would yield much lower reward in the future or in the present relative to the past, but yet in the past you may have had a reward that is equivalent to the future because at that time you were acclimated to the resolution. But as resolution increases over time, the reward is depreciated. We constantly are progressing. That is what nature does. We progress. We always have to move forward. We always are moving towards the better and better option. That's just a natural tendency to meet the demands of society. If the demands of society increase, that means the standards are going to have to increase. That means in the future, men are going to be, the men who are more technically savvy are going to have higher probability of success. It's just the way it is. So then you kind of have to conform to the demands of society to a degree if you want to have some success, but there's always outliers because it's parabolic and it depends on the region, like I said. But anyways, these standards are, rising, and it's influenced by many factors like options and so forth, and exposure to the extremes, for instance, globalization. We now know what exists. We now know what is possible. So therefore, we tend to have a tendency to desire such possibilities in this land of opportunity. And so if that opportunity presents itself, we would naturally seek it. Why not? So this is just my assessment on it. I think they both work together in tandem, and it's very hard to determine which is more because it's distributed over a spectrum. But anyways, that's all I have. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.